Welcome to the Haven for Soul Care Authors Corner, where we explore powerful stories and the incredible minds behind them. I'm your host, Brianna, and today I'm honored to be joined by Dan Stidham, defense attorney for the West Memphis Three, and author of the groundbreaking true crime book, A Harvest of Innocence. In this episode, Dan takes us behind the scenes of one of the most infamous wrongful conviction in American history. From the coerced confession that sparked the nation's outcry to his personal battle for justice, Dan shares eye-opening details about the case, the lives it impacted, and his continued fight to uncover the truth. If you're passionate about justice and compelling storytelling, you're in for an unforgettable conversation. So let's join right now. Welcome to another episode of the Haven for Soul Care podcast. We are excited because we have a special guest with us on today, Dan Stidham, who has wrote this wonderful book called A Harvest of Innocence, the Untold Story of the West Memphis Three murder case. So I'm talking really fast, and my words may sound a little jumbled up, but I'm excited because when I was going over, I have had a chance to review a little bit of your book, but just what I have heard from your interview from someone else, I'm just ready to jump into it. So Dan, I'm gonna turn it over to you for you to introduce yourself to our audience, and then we're gonna get right into the interview if you don't mind.
All right, very good. My name is Dan Stidham. I'm one of the authors of A Harvest of Innocence. The book is about a 31-year-old murder case that still remains unsolved. I represented a 17-year-old mentally handicapped young kid, and I wasn't much older than he was. I was only 30. This was my first jury trial, his first chair, so I was very young, and what I did is, as the case was going on, I journaled things when I noticed things weren't going the way they should be going, and the journaling turned into writing, and so this has been sort of a 30-year process. I started collaborating with Tom McCarthy, my co-author, in 2014. And ironically, he said we would have it done by Christmas, and here we are. 9 years later, we're published back in November. So a lot of things happened along the way, and some were good, some were bad. I lost a child in 2021, which was the year we had planned to publish, and I had to suffer through the grief of that and get my head screwed on straight before I could finish it up. We just had a couple of chapters, and I'm happy to announce that we have just completed the audio book. All I have to do is get the files to my lady who puts all that stuff up for me. Her name is Tammy.
Mm-hmm.
And she does great work. As I have no idea how to do that. I just send her the files, and she puts it together. So my dad is currently in the hospital. He had a bleeding on the brain, which was scared us to death last night. But he is rapidly improving, and hope he gets to come home by the weekend. So maybe even Friday. So they took him. Brain bleed stopped, thankfully, so they don't have to do surgery. But it's just been a stressful couple of days.
Yeah.
But the
Well,
other reason people always ask me this is why I waited so long, and that's because of how the West Memphis Three were released from prison after 18 years and 78 days. They were released through a device called an outward plea, which allowed them to, I don't know if I've got allergies or just a cold or what, but I can't get rid of this drainage going down the back of my throat. Of course, it's summer one day and winter the next here in
it is.
Arkansas, but I'm struggling a bit with my voice. So,
Take your
but
time.
The Alford plea had a 10-year SIS, which is a suspended imposition of sentence. So if any of them were to get in trouble during that 10-year period, of course they didn't, then they would go back to prison. And so none of them did. None of them got in trouble. And so I had to get past that day because I didn't want to paint a target on them, because many of the things in my book, um, people have referred to me as a whistleblower. I just consider myself a truth teller.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wanted there to be an official record of the case that has never been discussed and never been brought up in any of the documentary films or the ridiculously odd feature film that was made. And so I just decided that I wanted there to be a true and actual accounting of what happened,
Mm-hmm.
how it happened, why it happened, and try to prevent it from happening again to anyone else.
So, if you could catch us for it, because everyone is not familiar with this case, can you give us a summary of what the case was about?
Sure. Back on May 5th, 1993, three 8-year-old boys were last seen riding two bicycles on the service road of the third busiest interstate exchange in the country, where I-40 and I-55 merge in West Memphis, Arkansas, just across the Mississippi from Memphis. And that's the last time they were seen. People looked all night for them, couldn't find them, and their bodies were discovered almost exactly where they were last seen, on the service road, in a drainage ditch. And it was a horrible sight. And the bodies were mutilated. One boy in particular was sexually mutilated, and it was just, it wasn't just a crime, it was an atrocity, a human atrocity. And unfortunately, when human atrocities occur, they're often met with another human atrocity in response to that. And that's what happened in this case. Back in 1993, the country was still going through the Satanic Panic period that we had the McMartin preschool case in California. The kids were telling the police and the prosecutor that they were being molested when in fact they weren't. The state of California spent millions of dollars, even excavated the backyard of the house to find these tunnels that didn't exist. And one of the kids even told the prosecutors and the police that one day they flew to Australia with a pink elephant on board. And of course, that would be impossible to fly that far. And I have never seen a pink elephant, although I guess they could exist. Um, but just the time factor, it was just so ridiculous. And the way they interviewed the children was the same way they would interview an adult. And so, out of the McMartin case, at the McMartin's expense, of course, a new technique of interviewing children who were alleging abuse was formed, and the FBI came in and did a study and decided that this children should be interviewed differently, without leading questions, and just let them tell their story, essentially build trust with the child. And so uh, the FBI did an extensive study and determined that there was never ever, and still hasn't to this day, been a single case of satanic ritualistic homicide ever on the planet.
Oh,
And
wow.
that's how the prosecutors prosecuted the case, because that's what they thought had happened. And so history is filled with examples of satanic panic and
Mm-hmm.
moral panic.
Mm-hmm.
One of which would be the Salem witch trials would be the best example. And of course, the same thing happened in Europe
Mm-hmm.
with the Black Plague, and everybody couldn't understand what was happening or what was causing it, so they blamed it on the devil.
Yeah.
And so the classic good versus evil scenario that has some religious overtones, and that's what I was up against, was basically a lynch mob wanting to hang these kids for crimes they just simply didn't commit.
Mm.
And my client, who was mentally retarded, that's what we called it back then. Today it's more gently referred to as MR, as you are aware.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and he not only didn't understand what a lawyer was, he didn't know what a jury was, what the prosecutor's role was, what the judge's role was, and he wasn't fit for trial. But we could not find a psychologist who was competent to make that diagnosis back in
Mm.
'94, January of '94, and February of '94, when we had the trial.
Mm-hmm.
Fortunately, 10 years later, we did, through the generosity of many people from around the world who donated money for the defense cause. We were able to get Dr. Tim Durning, who's based out of San Francisco, and he determined that Mr. Misskelley had MR, and that condition is static. There's no pill you can take to fix it. It is what it is, and um, he was not fit for trial because he couldn't understand the proceedings, and he couldn't understand what a lawyer was. He thought I was a cop. And that's why he repeated the story back to me so many times, and every time it would be different. So I knew something was wrong, but I didn't have any experience in dealing with people with MR. And so my background is in sociology, but I knew something was wrong. And The police misread the autopsy report. The initial autopsy report talked about the little boy's anuses were dilated because they were in the water. And that is a natural phenomenon, but the police misinterpreted that as the kids being raped and sodomized. And so that's what they got Mr. Misskelley, who was just putty in their hands and only 17 years old, to come up with this fairy tale about Damien and Jason, um, the other two of the West Memphis Three, Damien Eccles and Jason Baldwin. That's how they got snared into the trap, because of not Mr. Misskelley's false confession, but because of Inspector Gary Gitchell's false confession. He was the lead investigator in the case. So naturally, due to my inexperience and the fact that there was some misconduct going on by the judge and the prosecutor, um, it didn't turn out well at trial. I was able to dodge the death penalty, and the judge would not let my experts testify.
Mm.
So when it got time to put on our defense, the prosecutors argued that our social psychologist, who had a PhD from a little known college in Berkeley, California. I don't know if you ever heard of it before or not, but the prosecutors argued he wasn't a real doctor because he couldn't fix a broken arm. And then 3 weeks later, he allowed a retired police officer from Ohio to testify, and he had a mail order PhD, which I know COVID has changed the world, and now people are getting their degrees online with some recommend requirements that they're accredited to be on campus for so many weeks or months during the semester. So back then it was unheard of, and he never stepped foot on the campus. All he did was pay him, and they sent him a PhD. So, and the judge amazingly allowed him to testify that this murder had the trappings of the occult,
Wow.
and also stated in the record that even a third grader with knowledge that could assist the jury in evaluating the case could be declared an expert. And I'm thinking, I had the best expert on the planet and two of the best experts. who didn't have to pay a nickel to. They actually volunteered when they saw the false confession and the false, or the fact that the polygraph was given and Mr. Misskelley had passed it,
Hmm. Let
but
me
they
stop.
told him that he failed it.
Let me stop you there. Because this is a lot for a young attorney, and then
Yeah,
to
yes, it was.
have clients that are close to your age, and you can see all of the misjustice that is going on. What kind of toll did that have on you?
Well, marriage didn't emerge from it. Um, I became obsessed with uh, finding out the truth, and I'm still looking. The only thing I know for certain is that the West Memphis Three did not do it. Um, false confessions were a new thing back then, and there wasn't a whole lot of peer-reviewed studies, and so now it's common. We have three types of false confessions. There's the type of people who will go into the police and confess just to get their 20 minutes of fame on the news. And the best example I can give you of that is John Benet Ramsey case, where the fellow, I can't even remember his name, he confessed in Thailand, and they got on a jet, went and got him, extradited him, brought him back to Boulder, Colorado, and he didn't know breakfast about the case. But he got to be on TV, so that was his goal. And the second kind of confession is where the interrogator is using the Reed technique, which is outdated and no longer favored by most law enforcement, including the FBI. Which we've all seen it on the crime TV shows, where the good cop, bad cop thing comes in, and one officer sits on kind of far away from the person being interrogated, and then the other officer is just as close as he possibly can get to the person who's being interrogated, and often touches him on the shoulder and reassures him that it's okay that he raped this girl because she deserved it or she was hot, and he can understand why he did it. And the cops can lie to people to trick them to confess, and the U.S. Supreme Court has said that's perfectly fine. But it often leads to a false confession because people, they actually convince people that they did it, and the person adopts that as their new regime of thinking, and they're absolutely convinced that they must have passed out or done it while they were on drugs, and but it doesn't really match up with the crime scene unless the police feed those facts to the person they're interrogating. The final type of false confession is when a person is interrogated and he knows he didn't do it. The police can't convince him that he did it, but he sees that as the only way out of the stress that they're putting him in. Studies have shown that most of us will break down after 4 hours of interrogation and just to end it, get it over with, and thinking that they can fix it later, which almost never works out unless they got you on video at Walmart or Target or someplace, and you got an alibi suddenly, which has happened. But Mr. Misskelley fit into the last category. He knew he didn't do it, and he just wanted out of that room because they told him, if you just tell us what we want to hear, you can go home and be with your dad. No lawyer present, even though Arkansas law at the time required father or other parent to sign off on Miranda, because people who have MR cannot understand Miranda. They don't understand its meaning. And people with MR are concrete thinkers. In other words, they think about the problem at hand, not thinking about the consequences on down the road.
Mm-hmm.
You and I are abstract thinkers, and we know that if we confess to a murder, that it's, even though we want to get out of the room and be done with this, they could come back to haunt us if we can't later prove our innocence, which the burden of proof is on the state, not the defendant.
Mm-hmm.
So I am a judge, and when my kids reach the age of 10 years old, I had to set them down and tell them that police officers are not your friends. And if you ever are interrogated by a police officer, you don't say anything except, I want my dad and a lawyer. So that makes it pretty obvious that you should never, ever talk to the police about anything.
Yeah.
Because if you do, you might innocently admit that you were somewhere and that somewhere happened to be near the crime scene, and then eyewitness misidentification, which is the most common way that people are convicted. And the second most common is false confessions, 30%. And eyewitness misidentification is about 60% of the reason for the first 300 exonerees from the Innocence Project. So
Mm-hmm.
that tells us that we've been executing innocent people in this country for many, many years. And we need to change the rules up a little bit where it's fair. Um, and so I've been on this crusade not only to free my client, which I was able to do with a heck of a lot of help from a lot of people, including a lot of celebrities who got involved because they could relate to these kids being outcast kids, the throwaway kids. The uh, music they listened to was Metallica. In fact, when Jason Baldwin was arrested, he was wearing a Metallica T-shirt, and uh, heavy metal, Black Sabbath, all the heavy metal bands, and in fact, it made Metallica so angry they donated their music to the documentaries from HBO. And hearing that one song of me walking around the crime scene that they're playing, I think it was called Sanitarium. I'm not exactly sure about that, but I hear that song on the radio and it just gives me the heebie-jeebies.
Yeah.
And I didn't know how bad this had affected me until um, after the trial was over. Suddenly, Mr. Misskelley dodged the death penalty, but he got life plus 40, which is life. Obviously, there's no difference between that and life without parole. So licked my wounds for a few days, but I had promised Mr. Misskelley that no matter what, I would never give up on him and I would get him out of prison. And again, with the help of an army, I sort of held down the fort until the big boys got there, the forensic scientists and some of the best lawyers I've ever worked with. Amazing talent.
And
And we,
how long did it take you to get them out? What to get him out?
18 years and 78 days.
Mm.
And that is about the average for an exoneration. Of course, these kids weren't exonerated. They were, um, Damien was ready to get out, and I don't blame him. But Jason Baldwin wanted a new trial. My client wanted to go home, but he deserved a new trial. And so the state of Arkansas took the cowardly way out and said, if you'll plead guilty while maintaining your innocence, then we'll let you go home. And how could someone refuse that offer? And so they walked out of prison by um, Jason Baldwin summed it up best. He said it took a false confession to get us into prison and a false confession to get us out of prison. The downside was now they're convicted felons, and that affects their ability to get jobs. And Jason told me a few months back that he doesn't leave the country anymore because they treat him like he's a terrorist or something. X-ray and body cavity searches and just crazy stuff. And so he doesn't leave the country. And my PTSD brought on by the case, pales in comparison, obviously, to the West Memphis Three, and which pales in comparison to the four parents who lost their children. And having lost a child a few years ago, I understand much better what they went through. And I was fortunate enough to get 34 years with my son. They only got 8. So at the offered plea hearing, I thought the world would be lifted off my shoulders. I could write my book and ride off into the sunset, and I didn't have to worry about you can't criticize a court and expect to get a favorable ruling. So I couldn't say anything about any of this stuff that I now can talk about. And one observer that read my book said and he is a West Memphis Three junkie. I mean, and he said there's almost 100 things in here that I didn't know about the case. So a lot of people, including publishers, said that this was old news, and it's never left the news ever in the entire 31 years. It will soon be 32 in May, which is always a bad anniversary for me and a trigger for PTSD. But again, what I went through was nothing compared to what they went through. Well, after my son died, I decided to pour the book and its manuscript through the filter of having lost a child myself, and I wanted to make sure that I was kind and gentle and passionate when it came to talking about the murders, and I hope I succeeded in that. People tell me that I have, but uh, um, there's no biological material that was ever recovered from the West Memphis Three at the crime scene. Ironically, inside one of the knots, they were tied up with their shoestrings and thrown in the water, nude. And one of we were allowed to do some testing, DNA testing, under the DNA statute in Arkansas, and we found a hair that matched Terry Hobbs inside one of the ligatures that bound the victim, Michael Moore. Mm-hmm. And that's significant because it was in the binding, it was in the knot. So wasn't a big enough profile that we could exclude him as to all others, but a friend that was with him at the crime scene looking for the children earlier in the evening, or late that night, I should say, he left a hair behind on a tree stump, and it was an exact match. So Mr. Hobbs, I've gotten 3 or 4 bad reviews, and one of them was from him. One of them was from Mr. Moore, which is not a laughing matter, but he still believes they're guilty because he has to believe that to have closure. And I understand that, but these kids didn't do it. I wouldn't spend half my life trying to save them and get them out of prison if I thought for a split second that they were guilty.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question. With you knowing all of what took place with this case, and I know it has haunted you. First, let me extend my condolences. I can't imagine the pain, or the grief that you're dealing with the loss of your son. So please know that you're going to continuously be in our thoughts and our prayers.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. It means a lot.
But I want to ask you, because I know you went from being a lawyer to being a judge, and knowing how the system can be corrupt, how things can occur and wrongful convictions happen seem like when you turn on the news, you see it all the time. And then especially with me being African American, I know we you said something that really caught my attention when you said you set your children down at 10 and you had to let them know, hey, the police are not your friend, which is being African American, we're told that. As soon as we're able to go outside, we're able to get in our cars and drive on our own, it's like, hey, be careful. So, with you being a judge and knowing this, case did this case cause you to be one that really looked at all the evidence that came before you with any case that was presented to you or came in your courtroom?
Absolutely. It changed the way I viewed everything. And because sometimes things don't always look as they appear, and confessions need to be corroborated. And in Arkansas, the only thing needed to corroborate a confession is a body. So it doesn't take much to um, I always think of that movie that Sidney Poitier was in, Heat of the Night, and it's kind of exactly what you're talking about. And what an outstanding performance and a great movie. But I can't imagine. Well, no, I can because I see it every day in my courtroom. Um, and I don't tolerate it. I just can't stand injustice of any kind. And if the state doesn't prove their case, they may be guilty, but if they don't prove that they're guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, they're going home.
Mm-hmm.
And I take every case very seriously. And a lot of times I'll even take a recess, review my notes from the trial, and meditate a little bit. I call it counting to 10, and breathe a little bit. And sometimes I'll take a few days to think about it and look for gaps in testimony. One of the things that I look for is if everything happened exactly the way everybody said it happened, that means it didn't happen that way. Because no two people can observe something that and process it the same way. If I'll ask your listeners this question: has anyone ever come up to you and said, "Hi, Judy," or "Hi, Bob," or and you look at them like, "Who are you? I don't know who you are," and you're trying to search through your memory to think if you knew them, and
That is
then
me
you
all
try to
day.
put it you try to put it into context to make sure you're not making a mistake. And I actually had a girl hit on me that way in college, and it worked. So, um, but that was a long time ago. Uh, but I didn't realize I had PTSD, and I didn't realize how bad things were getting until the nightmares started. And it's like I'm not comparing myself to someone who has been in battle. No one's ever taken a shot at me um, yet, anyway. Um, Violence against judges has increased about 500 or 600% since 2016, and it's not uh, hard to figure out where that came from.
Mm-hmm.
The person who thinks it's okay to not just criticize a judge, but bash a judge. Um, and so now people think they can do it, and I'm too old for that stuff. And if it happens in my courtroom, you're going to jail. So, and there's no Alford pleas in my court. I have people all the time that come in and say, "I just want to plead guilty and get this over with." I said, "Well, did you do it?" "No." I said, "Well, I'm not going to accept your plea. I'll see you in January for trial." And they said, "No, I don't want to come back for trial. And I'm just going to plead guilty." And I said, "Well, are you truth, in fact, guilty?" "No, I'm not, but I just want to get this over with. And I'll see you in January, and we have a trial." And usually by January, they've figured it out that they actually did do it and just didn't want to admit it. That's But sometimes, they don't want to admit it because they're innocent. And it's my job to call them as I see them. But every time I hear a case, I pour it through that filter of the West Memphis Three case because I've been there. And I've done that job, and I can give you a perfect example. I had yesterday a veteran who had a panic attack and got disorderly and kind of crazy with the police, which is never a good idea. And he told me that he had PSD from Iraq, and I gave him the opportunity to go to the VA and get help. And just about an hour ago, I got a call from his rep saying that he reported and is getting help. And he was able to repeat some of the tips that I gave him that I've learned to deal with it, and which astonished me. So I think maybe that means he's serious about getting some help. It's like losing a child. You don't ever get over it. You just get used to it. And
Yeah.
you have good days and bad days, and PTSD is the same way. You don't know when it's going to hit you. I hate the springtime and early summer because that's when it rains and fills the ditches with mud, and it's not nearly as bad as it used to be. But sometimes it'll trigger. I can look in a muddy ditch and see a body floating. I know it's not there, but that's what I see. And it's been tough, but as I say in my book, I don't regret a thing. This needed to be done, and somebody had to do it, and why not me?
Yeah.
Um, what I didn't have an experience, I made up for with BS and guts, and still doing that, faking it to make it today. But it's it's a very, very complicated case, but the goals of my book were to obviously make it, as I said earlier, a true accounting of what really happened. People need to know what happened and what didn't happen, um, and who caused it to happen. And I did not want them to be able to hide behind that Alford plea and walk off like nothing ever happened. Because they pled guilty, even while maintaining their innocence, they didn't receive any compensation whatsoever from the state of Arkansas.
So not only did they plead guilty and they weren't, and now they are suffering the consequences because when you come out with a felon, when you have a felony on your record, it's hard to even get a job, an interview, and so trying to be a productive citizen becomes very, very hard. Um, and so now I have this record and you didn't compensate me. So how do you expect for me to live? I think that for me, that's one of the hardest things that I come across is when I see men and women who have been incarcerated and they come home and they are struggling, trying their best to get back into society and do the right thing, but they're met with all these closed doors. And then to know that you didn't even do what they're saying you did.
Yeah, I can't even imagine uh, how that must feel. But I know how it felt every time I went to the prison and met with my client and Jason Baldwin, who was at the same location, and then Damien ended up at the same location on death row. And I would go and visit him, and we would always hold our hands to the glass because they would never let us in the same room. Um, and I found a letter that I think I included in my book from him stating that, have you seen the new DNA results, which I had? And he said they can't argue that we were there because we weren't. So I'm looking forward to the day where we can actually talk outside this glass cage. And of course, he was in a 10 by 10 tomb essentially, and got 1 hour of daylight or rain or whatever was happening at the time. And I can't see how he didn't go crazy. It would drive me crazy. But Damien is very intelligent. At age 18, he was pretty naive and kind of played around with the cops, which made the case much more difficult than it needed to be.
Yeah.
But he actually publicly stated that he understood why Jessie confessed, because if they put as much pressure on him as they did me, he said, I can't imagine him being able to withstand that.
Yeah, yeah. I want to double back just a little bit, because many times people, and even some of our listeners don't understand that PTSD, when they first coined PTSD, it was primarily just for soldiers who had been in combat. But now we understand that trauma, and what you went through was that was traumatizing to know things and to try. I mean, and then actually seeing the scene of something so brutal, that causes trauma within the brain, which in it a lot of times incurs or it coincides with the PTSD. And so it's anytime your brain has been injured and you it's almost like a re-injury every time you're triggered to
It's like watching a
something
movie.
especially that violent.
Yeah, and this was a very violent crime scene. Ironically, the state of Arkansas gave up, you can call it that, when we came in with the best forensic experts who stated that the wounds on the bodies were caused by animal predation, something that I knew as early as 1998, but I didn't have the help then that I had later on. And I actually stalked some forensic scientists at one of their meetings in San Francisco, and Dr. Bodden is one of the most well known and best qualified forensic pathologists in the world. Somehow I coerced him into coming into my hotel room and looking at my photographs from the crime scene. And I'll never forget, he picked up the one of the child who'd been mutilated sexually, and he says, "This is not a satanic ritual. This is animal predation. It's obvious." And also got a forensic entomologist, Dr. Neil Haskell, into the room, and he looked at it and he said, "Yeah, I agree completely." Um, and then we conducted an experiment. I say we. Um, the filmmakers of the West of Memphis documentary did an experiment with a pig in the movie. They put a baby pig in an aquarium with some turtles, and man, did they eat that up! And I mean, it was instantaneously. When you're dead, you're food.
Hmm.
Um, and They go straight for the soft tissue, and that's the genitals and the ears and the nose and the lips, and that's exactly what happened here. And you can actually see the claw marks that the prosecutors tried to pass off as knife marks. But all of our experts, including Werner Spitz, who's now passed away, unfortunately, uh, he kind of wrote the book on forensic pathology, and he said there's no knives involved in these wounds. This is all animal predation. So the state of Arkansas, instead of doing the right thing and saying, "Hey, you know what? You got us. You completely destroyed our case. No reasonable jury would convict these kids now. They're not kids anymore. I'm 61, so they've got to be in their 40s or they're middle aged, but the best years of their lives were taken away from them because in sociology we studied Emil Durkheim, and he has a theory about social um, what happens to a group when something horrible happens that they can't explain, like the Salem witch trial. Um, Now we know that it was probably one of the little girls was schizophrenic or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then it got to land grabbing, where people were saying my neighbor's a witch, so they could get their land cheap. Um, and finally, after 10 months, the governor of Massachusetts stepped in and said, "Hey, you got to stop this stuff. It's getting crazy." They even hung a dog. It's just because he was allegedly a witch, he or she, I guess I should say. But it was almost exactly 300 years later that the West Memphis case happened, which is sometimes referred to as the Arkansas witch trials. And but the PTS, it hit me um, when I woke up the day after the trial and didn't have anything to do. I had been in a constant stage of making split second decisions with witnesses and strategy, and suddenly I woke up and like, what do I do now? I didn't have any clients. My practice had disappeared, and so I started rebuilding my practice. The tax man cometh and wanted his money, even though it took him a couple of years to pay us. I got $19 an hour. My partner and I did for the more than 2,000 hours we had in the case, and I quit counting after that. Um, so there is good news on the horizon, though. We recently got permission from the Arkansas Supreme Court to test the evidence again using more modern techniques such as MVAC DNA collection.
Yeah.
So the case that's never left the news in 30 years did enter the news. It was worldwide news. It wasn't just local news or national news. It was worldwide. We're selling books all over the world. It's amazing. Uh, there's been a huge spike in the UK here recently, and I'm hoping with the release of the audiobook here, once I get my dad back home from the hospital, that I can get that out there way before Thanksgiving or Christmas, I should say. And so 99% of the reviews we've gotten are is very good, which is deeply gratifying. And it's true crime. And what I did to occupy my brain while I was trying to figure out what was going on with it is I read John Grisham novels, all of them. And then I started having heart palpitations and went to a cardiologist, and um, then finally they figured out it was PTSD. And so that's what happens with our warriors, our soldiers, when they come home. They don't have anything to do. There's nobody shooting at them. They're not shooting at anybody most of the time. But I forget the statistic. I think it's one veteran commits suicide every 3 minutes or something like that. It's hard to believe, but and that's why a lot of them go back for another tour, because they that's what they're used to and what they crave is the adrenaline. And of course that tears families apart and marriages apart, and so I didn't have it nearly as bad as those folks did, or the victims' parents, which I still feel so sorry for. Um, but that day in the courtroom, when they entered the Alford pleas, I was introducing my fiance to Eddie Vedder and Natalie Maines, who played crucial roles in helping us with the case. And um, somebody tapped me on the shoulder, and there was a deputy, and I turned around, and it was one of the stepfathers, Mark Byers, who was, everybody thought he did it at first. because he acted so strangely in front of the cameras for the HBO documentaries. But we could account for every moment where he was at, but he didn't have an opportunity to do it. But he leaned down because he's about 6'8", or he used to be. He passed away in a car accident a couple of years ago. But he asked me to promise him that I would find the real killer. And he said, we both know who it is. And he was referring, of course, to Terry Hobbs. So I'm not willing to take Mr. Hobbs off the suspect list. And with this new DNA testing, if I was him, I'd be really worried. And my alternative theory that I've been exploring for the last 5 or 6 years, maybe 10, is a serial killer, a truck driver, long haul truck driver serial killer. And there's a lot more out there than people think. The FBI estimates there's between 200 and 300 active serial killers, and they're dumping the bodies all along Interstate 40 from coast to coast. Most of these bodies have not been identified because nobody's looking for them. They're runaways or castaways or drug addicts, sex workers, and so nobody's looking for them. Nobody's filed a missing report, and DNA will only take you so far. You got to have something to compare it to, and that's what we're praying for with this new round of testing, which I hope will take place soon.
Yeah, well, let me ask you this. Um, was it any other cases that were around in that area or during that
Yes,
time that was similar to the way that these babies um passed away?
there were. In fact, the day before, ironically, that Mr. Misskelley gave his false confession, there was an article in the Commercial Appeal from Memphis talking about other similar cases in eastern Arkansas. And I can't remember exactly how many there were, but I think most of them are still unsolved. And the bodies were all found in water.
Wow.
So the MO wasn't exactly the same, but those crimes, to my knowledge, had never been solved.
Did you see any that occurred after the boys that were
No,
similar? They kind of just died down after that.
triple homicides of kids are quite rare, especially young kids, because they're high risk victims. A truck driver or a stepdad would not want to, you know, be in possession or near where the bodies were. And so if it was a truck driver, there was a truck stop right next door, which backed right up to the crime scene. It was literally, you could throw a baseball from the back of the parking lot to the ditch. So, and also throw a baseball to the service road. And if you got a good arm and a good balance, you can make it all the way out to the interstate.
Mm.
So that's the two theories that I'm exploring. Pam Hobbs, after Mark Byers made me promise, how could I say no, that she made me promise that I would look for the killer, and I'm still working.
Yeah.
In over 30 years, more than half my life, I've been working on this case.
Has it taken a how has it taken a toll on your family?
Well, fortunately, I got two sets of kids, and what I mean by that is I got two older ones and two younger ones. And my youngest is 10 years apart from my oldest. And so the older ones understood what was going on, but the younger ones never really did. It did have some impact on my daughter because she shared her journal for me, some of which ended up in the book with her permission, about how scared she was about things that were happening. Everybody was scared to death. It was the boogeyman was out there, and the only problem was there's no such thing as a boogeyman. There's people who are evil. That's because good Lord has given us free will, and sometimes people choose evil, or perhaps genetically are inclined to be evil. Their criminologists are looking at that again. They thought that theory had went out the window, but they're now re-examining that. So, um, still plugging away after all these years.
Yeah.
I haven't had as much time to work on the case because I've been busy doing interviews and trying to sell books and get the audio book ready to get out there for people. I discovered something the other day. I'm getting older, and when I speak publicly about the case, I was at my alma mater, the University of Arkansas School of Law in Fayetteville, Arkansas, and I was speaking to some kids, and I was telling them about the celebrities that got involved in the financing of the case for the defense, and I mentioned the word Pearl Jam and Eddie Vedder, and there was not a single hand that came up. And I asked him because I saw all the blank faces. I said, "Do you not know who Eddie Vedder is?" And nobody in there knew who Eddie Vedder was or heard of the band Pearl Jam. So I thought, wow, it's been a long time. So, and interestingly, one of our largest readership comes from younger people. And I used to have a standing gig before COVID, and we even did some Skype stuff after COVID. But from 2014 up until COVID occurred, um, I would travel to Baltimore once or twice a year and speak to a criminal justice class. And these are just kids, 16, 17 years old. And of course, I had to, downsize my presentation because I didn't want to show them pictures of three dead kids. But um, the future is in good hands. Let's put it that way. These kids are from the 10th or 8th or 10th largest school district in the country.
Mm-hmm.
And man, are they smart. They're inner city kids, and we made a great connection. I enjoy sharing the story with folks, and they're on top of their game. And I've seen some future judges and lawyers and
Wow.
prosecutors and public defenders in there, and some of them have actually gone on and contacted me and either asked for a letter of recommendation or say, "Hey, I'm in law school now," and so it's great to see that happening. So
That's wonderful.
sometimes the new kids get the bad rap for being stereotyped, which is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
They just don't have the references that those of us who've lived through 9/11. None of these kids were alive during 9/11. They weren't even born yet when the West Memphis case started, but they're one of our biggest readerships. And the case, and now my book is being used in curriculums all over the country in colleges and high schools.
That is awesome. I want to ask you, I want to ask you two questions. One, and before we end, one is, so if you could go back to that year, to 1993, what advice would you give yourself?
That's the way I wrote the book. It was the older Dan looking back at the younger Dan, and sometimes in disbelief. And I got an anonymous package one time. It's pretty obvious where it came from, but I got the entire raw footage of the trial. And there were times when my partner and I were out of the room talking to a witness or client, and the judge would make disparaging remarks in front of the jury about us. And it was just the things he did during the trial were just uh, mind boggling. I can't believe that Arkansas Supreme Court let him get away with it. And I would ruin the book if I told you who
Don't you?
confessed to that
Yeah.
very thing. So there's 100 things in there that a lot of people who thought they knew everything about the case um, are going to be surprised if they read the book, and I
Yeah.
hope they do. Not, I'm not in this for the money. I'm in this for the knowledge and passing it on, and that's why I enjoy teaching, interacting with students because they're the next generation, and I hope they can benefit from not only my mistakes as a young lawyer, but what I've learned since.
Yeah. Well, I've and truly have enjoyed talking to you. It's fascinating. I have the privilege, like many of us, to see people with your type of heart on television, but to actually be able to speak to you and actually be able to feel your heart towards this case and your client, it's amazing. I wish we could have more people that were like you that fought for justice. Um, and so my hat is off to you. I appreciate you. I thank you
Thank you
for
so much.
your duty. I thank you for your commitment um to your client. I do. And we will continuously be praying for you that these cases solve sooner than later. Sooner than later. But we do want to get your book. So tell us, where can we get your book? Um, and you said the audio book will be coming out soon. So tell us where we can get your book, and we'll be looking for the audio book as well, because I have many readers who like to listen versus read.
I'm a book in the hand kind of guy. I'm old school, but
Me too.
it's available on Amazon .com. Just type in Dan Stidham or A Harvest of Innocence. And right now we're having Black December, I guess, instead of
Yeah.
Black Friday.
Yeah.
So the prices are going to be reduced until the book has to be printed. It's printed on demand. So they'll not be able to order the books and get them before Christmas soon. So the platform that we're putting the audiobook on, and for the life of me, it's been a rough couple of days. I can't recall the name of the company.
Is it audio
Um,
with Amazon?
I think it's Castaways, and so it'll basically get a broader reach than Amazon,
Okay.
which has a huge reach, but it will hopefully end up on all of the um, uh, podcast platforms, and people have been screaming for it for almost a year now, and I
Hmm.
keep thinking next week, next week, next week, and I finally got the files and yesterday, and then I got the emergency phone call while I was on the bench to go to the hospital. I actually beat my dad to the hospital.
Mm,
So he's doing better.
good.
He had a rough night, but he's doing better, and he was had a brain bleed,
Hmm.
and it's not bleeding anymore. But
Good.
he couldn't read. He couldn't. It was kind of weird watching him try to read. He'd have to spell the word out and then pronounce it to be able to read it. And so the doctors at this point think that they're not going to have to do any surgery, and
Good.
um, so he's getting a cardiologist uh, consult, and then he'll be in ICU for a couple of days, and hopefully we'll be able to bring him home on Friday.
Well, good. I'm praying for a speedy recovery. I used to be a chaplain in the hospital, and so I've seen many people come in with that same type of injury or occurrence that had happen and make a full recovery. So I'm believing that your father will make a full recovery. So
He's a tough old man, and I think that still believe he's going to outlive me. So I would rather fight Mike Tyson with no ear protection than I would my dad.
oh wow.
I don't know if you can see the boxing gloves behind me, but that's how he taught me to fight.
Okay.
Those are his. He fought or boxed in Golden Gloves back in the day, and
Hmm.
was pretty good at it. So He taught me how to fight, and my mom taught me how to think and encouraged me all along the way. I was born in Chicago, actually,
Okay.
and she said I used to stand on tree stumps and give closing arguments to jury. I was 5 years old. So we moved to Arkansas because my sister was having trouble with the smog in the city. So we moved to Arkansas, and that's where I've been ever since.
Wow.
I
Wow.
was 5 years old. Dr. King was killed at the same time we moved here. I remember watching it on TV.
Mm,
And then a couple months later, RFK was shot, um, and it seems like history's repeating itself again.
yeah.
So, um,
Yeah.
pray for our country.
Yes.
Everyone need to get back together and be civil to one another
Mm,
and obey the rule of law and uh, stop all the shenanigans.
yes. 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 Because we're better united than we are divided. We're
Absolutely,
better united than
absolutely.
we are divided. So that has been our constant prayer is that we unite as citizens, um, as people, as humans, and have that just that respect for one another. Um,
I can remember the days after 9/11. We were all one country, one
mm-hmm.
person, and all dedicated to doing the right thing. And
Yeah,
that's the last time I've seen it.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't, I'm not
It's
sure.
sad that it takes a terrorist event or a war to unite the country, but we're so divided now and I don't understand why we still have the electoral college. It made sense back in the 1800s when it took a while for the votes to get from New Orleans to wherever back
Mm-hmm.
Washington. So, in fact, the War of 1812 was fought after the war was already over. They just didn't know it. So, no social media.
Yeah, no social media.
And I'm
I don't.
glad that we didn't have to deal with too much of that. We had the internet was kind of emerging at the same time, but I can't imagine trying a case like that with social media the way it is, and people think that they can get on there and say whatever they want to say, and it's hate, and they spew it, and it's just really sad. Um, so hopefully, someone can bring us back together,
Yeah,
and I hope that happens soon.
I do too. I do too. I do too. But we're constantly praying. We are. Again, we thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome. I really did enjoy having you on here. And again, we are praying that um, justice is served in this upcoming year, and that everything that this new DNA, the results of the new DNA testing brings whoever done this um, to where they need to be. So because I could as a mother, I couldn't imagine um, something
It
like that.
was it was
Horrible.
tough losing a 34-year-old and losing an 8-year-old is I don't know how they did it. I don't know how they survived.
Yeah.
In fact, Mr. Byers has passed away. Mrs. Byers has passed away. Pam Hobbs is still living. Terry Hobbs is still living. Um, and obviously Michael Moore's father is still living because he gave me a bad review on Amazon, which is to be expected.
Yeah.
Um, he wants to believe because that provides him with closure that he needs to deal with it. And but I hope someday there were the Moores were the only family that didn't end up on our side at the end. All
Mm,
the others realized that this was just a well-told campfire story, no such thing as a boogeyman, and there's no such thing as satanic ritualistic homicide. Now we do have people like David Berkowitz and the Night Stalker who were inspired, so to speak, in their madness by the devil, but that's two different things.
Yeah, yeah. And I think if research, when you really research those who are doing things that are with the occult, they're what they do is a little different from the way that the boys' bodies were actually found. So,
Oh yeah, there wasn't any sign whatsoever of any cult activity at the crime scene or nothing other than what people wanted to believe. Everybody wants to be safe, and the that's why there's always a rush to judgment in cases of this sort because everybody wants to feel safe again.
yeah, yeah,
The truth of the matter is, we're never safe. There's always going to be people who do evil things, and and sometimes we end up in the wrong place at the wrong time and become victims.
yes. And that is so very true. That's why you have shows on. It's a show that I saw. Something about neighbors. Something about neighbors. So neighbors going wrong, and neighbors are going at each other, and eventually one is taking it overboard and killing, so you've been neighbors with this person for 20 years, and all of a sudden you have a rose bush that happens to be on their side of
Yep, I've seen
their
those
property.
evolve into violence and craziness. I did one as a lawyer, and I swore I'd never get involved in another property line dispute. So when I built my privacy fence, I moved to a new house. I went and got the owner next door and brought him over and said, "Is this okay? Are you satisfied that this is?" And I gave him a couple inches
Mm-hmm.
just
Mm-hmm.
so there wouldn't be any problems. It didn't matter to me. It was kind of irrelevant, but some people get crazy, and I just wanted to clear that away before it had a chance to blossom.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I have a neighbor now. He put his fence right on my fence. So
that
go figure.
happens. Yes,
Mm.
it does. Um, it seems like you're buying your neighbor's a fence sometimes.
That's what it seems like, and he's a renter. And so he didn't like me going to him and saying, "Hey, you do know your fence should not be on my fence. My fence is actually closing your fence off, and it's on my property line." So it is, we worked it out. I'm not one of those that will we're gonna go to court and all of that. So yeah.
Well, I have so much enjoyed our conversation, and thank you for inviting me.
Thank
And
you.
thank you for your thoughts and prayers. And I hope we cross paths again some other day.
Thank you for joining us on the Haven for Soul Care Authors Corner. Dan Stidham's insights into the West Memphis Three case and his relentless pursuit of justice reminds us all of the power of resilience and truth. Be sure to pick up his book, A Harvest of Innocence, to dive deeper into his gripping story. If you enjoyed this episode, please take the time to rate, review, and share it with fellow true crime enthusiasts. Don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring author interviews and discussions. Until next time, let's continue seeking truth, fostering justice, and caring for our souls.